Hurricane Maria, the fourth major hurricane of the 2017 season, the second Category 5. It's massive, but how big is it? In order to look at that, we got to get up inside the system. So let's do that. Let's get on top of it and really take a good look at how large the system was. As it moved over Puerto Rico, the winds close to 165 miles an hour. Now, you might be at home wondering, well, how does Maria compare to Irma? We can take a look at that. Let's put them side by side. First, Maria. The pressure fell to 908 millibars at its lowest point. The closer we get to 900, the more massive and extreme that storm is, which is exactly what it was. 300 miles across, maximum winds close to 175 miles an hour. Compare that to Irma, where the winds were actually a little bit higher, 185 miles an hour, and Irma was a bigger system. In fact, it was about 400 miles across. So Irma, larger than Maria, even though the pressure at the center of Maria was actually just a little bit lower. Now, these two systems, how do they compare with the biggest hurricane cyclone of all time? Nowhere near it. Check this out. Super Typhoon Tip back in 1979 was about 4 times bigger than where Maria is right now. Let's talk about how salt impacts your frozen water on a molecular level. These oranges represent our water molecules. When temperatures start to drop, these molecules start to slow down, and eventually they will bond. And by bonding, they freeze. And that's when we see that frozen water, of course, that ice. So how does the salt impact it? Well, once you put salt down, the salt will do its best to become a barricade for those bonds. Picture it like an offensive lineman. That lineman will stop any kind of rusher to get to the quarterback. The salt will stop that bond from happening. And if that bond doesn't happen, you don't have the frozen water. My point today is you shouldn't be excited for it. You should be expecting it. Look at how common it is for us to get into the 80s in May. A 93% chance of hitting 80 degrees. Over the last 15 Mays, we've gotten into the 80s 14 times. In fact, it is so common for us to get into the 80s that it's actually more rare for us not to get into the 80s than it is for us to get into the 90s. In fact, over the last 15 years, we've gotten into the 90s 3 times. And in order to really understand that, let's get into the solar system. Let's put the sun right there in the middle, the Earth rotating around it. So here's what we're looking at. For the summer solstice, tilted closer to the sun. Now, we leave summer and we transition to the autumnal equinox. That's this Friday. We'll come back to that. After autumn, we obviously go to winter. Now, winter is colder, and that makes sense too. Remember that 23.5-degree tilt? We're no longer tilted towards the sun. In fact, no, we're tilted away from the sun. So we get less of those direct rays, and we get some of those cooler temperatures. From winter, we go to the vernal equinox, which is spring, but we're not talking about any of those. We're talking about the autumnal equinox. So let's get back down into it here. You got the sun, you got the Earth. You may be thinking, wait a minute, that 23.5-degree angle thing, I feel like that's important. It is important because it is still angled as we move into and through fall, the autumnal equinox. If we get between the sun and the Earth, you can really understand why it matters. Let's give you some ETAs for this. Great tool we have here. 626 near the city of Monroe, Frenchtown. We're looking at about 622. So that's the way it is moving, and it's going to impact a lot of rural areas, but also some urban areas that are in northern and central Monroe County. Let's spin this into 3D mode. We love taking a look at this because it tells us how strong these storms are. The higher up in the atmosphere they are, once they get to about 40,000 feet, and that's where they sit currently, that's when we start getting the hail and the thunder and the lightning. And the hail has been reported as golf ball sized right in the heart of those thunderstorms. Let's start with a very basic meteorology lesson. When the sun is out, it's daytime. When the sun is gone, it's nighttime. The sun is out, it means it's warming up. The atmosphere is warming up, the ground is warming up. The sun is gone. At nighttime, things are cooling off. Got it? Okay, good. Now let's throw a wrench into this whole thing and have the sun out, but the moon out as well, covering it up. That's a solar eclipse. A lot of it comes down to vertical development. So if we want to talk about vertical development, let's get vertical. Let's get high up in the atmosphere, and let's talk about what is going on in the atmosphere to allow the storm to get as strong and as beefy as it is. All right, so these storms are 3-dimensional storms, but when we look at them on a map, they appear 2D. But this actually starts down at the surface and goes up tens of thousands of feet up into the atmosphere. You see that little eye there? Of course, it's not really all that little. It is a big eye. What's happening in that eye, right smack dab in the center, the air is cold and it's sinking. Now, the rest of the hurricane is warm, and it's actually seeing that air spin around and rise up in the atmosphere. So this air is coming up, but that air right in the center is sinking down. And it is all of these actions that lead to the storm getting stronger and stronger and stronger. But it all hinges on one thing: the warm ocean waters that they have out there in the Caribbean right now. As it fits through these two high pressure areas, the path puts it right there. So what does the water temperature look like right now? Unfortunately, it's very warm. Take a look at what buoys are picking up. You're seeing numbers that are close to 90 degrees, 89, 89, all the way up the coast of Florida. Those temperatures are upwards of 85 degrees right now. This warm water then feeds the outer bands of the hurricane, rises up in the atmosphere, and keeps allowing this hurricane to stay strong, which it will be all the way into the weekend. You ever started your car, looked at the thermometer, and thought, man, that weatherman is way off. It's like 10 degrees hotter than he said. Well, let me tell you this. Don't trust the thermometer in your car. In fact, there's not a thermometer in your car. Did you know that? I took this picture yesterday. It showed a temperature of 100 degrees outside. The official high temperature yesterday was 90 degrees. So why the difference? All right, here's why. There's no thermometer in there. Instead, there's a thing that's called a thermistor. A thermistor is located in your car. We started the day with a little extra cloud cover. Those clouds have dissipated, but some moisture is starting to swing into northern Michigan. It's all part of a low that's starting to track east, and as this rain swings around it, it may eventually bring a little bit here. Could happen early tonight, could happen overnight. Here, look at this. High temperatures in February, 47 degrees. High temperatures in March, 41 degrees. Typically in March, we see those high temperatures closer to 47, so that's a little bit backwards. The lows, average low in February of 29. Average low in March about 26. And it's not just the temperatures, it's also the snowfall numbers. In February, we only got 2.2 inches of snow, and in March we saw 6.9. So everything is a little bit backwards, including that last stat that you see down there. 5 times as many 60-degree days in February than we saw in March. Kind of crazy. Not a lot of people wondering about this one, and in fact I would say that most people are not wondering about this one. Snow in summer. Do we see it? Well, Carol was wondering about it, so at least one person was asking me this question. She posted this on my Facebook page. Has it snowed in June before? At first I thought, no way. I'm not even going to answer this question. Obviously the answer to this is no. But then I got curious. Then I started looking. So I thought, if I'm curious enough, you're probably curious enough. As things start to get interesting as we head into Thursday morning, because that's when some of the cold air will infiltrate the system and switch it over into snow. So we're going to call for snow on the western side of the state early Thursday. For us here in southeast Michigan, we probably won't see snowflakes until about 7 p.m. Thursday night heading into Friday, and then that continues early Friday morning. So how much are we talking about? These are the numbers people want to see. I like these numbers a lot. Downtown, about 1.2. This all looks very much on par with my forecast. About ½ an inch to 1 inch for areas farther south, 2 to 3 inches the farther north you go. In some of these pockets, some bullseyes like Pontiac, 3.5. Talk a little bit about the path and what will influence it as we look through the next 96 hours here. And this is kind of the deal. There are some obstacles in the way. Question is just going to be, will Irma run into it? And those obstacles, they're those mountain ranges. Take a look here. As we look at Puerto Rico, that mountain range, 4,357 feet. Unfortunately, the eye of the storm is going to pass north of that. Then as we get closer to the Dominican Republic, that mountain range, 10,164 feet. That's the tallest one. But again, you see that red line of the path? Stays north of it. If it had been impacted, or maybe will be impacted by those mountains, perhaps we're talking about a decrease in the pressure, or I should say decrease in the wind speeds. All right, I'll give it to you straight. We're not totally out of the woods when it comes to the severe weather, but the threat of it is falling as we move overnight and into the early hours tomorrow morning. And we'll have that full timeline in a second. We'll start with this, though, the flood watch that is in effect. This was issued early this morning, and it continues until tomorrow afternoon. Flood watch, of course, means that there's a chance with the atmosphere that we could see some flooding type rains. Inside is safe, but you want to stay away from windows. Now, some of these houses, if you're lucky, you got a pool in the backyard or maybe a lake. Obviously, water, not a great place to be around. Water conducts electricity. It does attract that lightning there as well. So never safe to be in a pool or any body of water. This week marks the halfway point from spring to summer. So what's happened so far? A lot of people are thinking it's been kind of a nasty spring. I think we don't remember what happened before this last week. The last 7 days, a lot of them have been cooler than average. But if you look at what's happened from the first day of spring to the current date right now, we've actually been above average a significant amount. 20 days warmer than normal, 16 days within a 5-degree range of normal, and only about 9 of them cooler than normal. So the spring has not been all that bad.